Our emotions are motions that take place in the body. And ideally, they move like water and they flow through us. And
then I think, we've been talking around the mind actually quite a bit just now, because we were talking about beliefs, and that's often so big a piece of it for us, especially in the Western world. But I'm wondering how you see the interweaving between the mind and the body and the heart, all the different pieces of surrender. It's, has a different flavor, it feels like, almost, with the different pieces. But
yeah, thank you. Thank you for bringing the body back into, or the rest of the body, right, into it. Just gonna let that settle in. The rest of the body becoming aware,
yes,
of this question. The first thought that comes in is also this element that I think we touched upon initially in our conversation, is that the mind, or the brain in itself, is an organ that is able to give us information as to what is happening to our body, is able to take in information, process that information. It's not really meant to store much, especially feelings. And so what it does, it's not able to process, it stores in the rest of our body. And when we look at the world we live in today, when we are bombarded with a lot of information coming in through the mind, the processing of that moves into the rest of the body, and in many cases stagnates in the body. And this comes from the disconnect that we have in many cases with our body as a whole, meaning that when information is coming in, we can right away actually be using the rest of our body, which has the same functions to be able to give us information and to process them. And what it ends up doing is that we don't use the rest of the wisdom that is there, yet we use kind of, I would say, top down here as storage. You imagine, things are just coming in here and then I'm storing everything else. And the surrender of the body actually also includes that deep element of making space and making room in the body, so that information can flow and process through the body, but also we start to resensitize those wisdom points in the body. And that for each of us is different and will be different. Though there are certain anecdotes also in our language that already take into account this, like the gut feeling. It actually is the body in the gut, sending you information. And so when we spoke to surrender and that inner knowing, right, the body being able to communicate, that decision, right? It's not just here that I understand that that's coming from the inside and that's what I want. And as I use the example, actually, that's not the job I want to take, but I need more space to understand what it is that I want to do. That sensation of knowing that can actually come from different body wisdom, from the rest of the body, I should say. So just to note that when we say body, I mean the rest of the body besides the mind, though as we aligned ourselves with mind, body, and heart, that connection is quite fluid, and we no longer disassociate one from the other. So that is what it would be in the body, right? Being able to pick up those signals and knowingness from the inside. And the heart to me is yet an element that I feel I'm most exploring. To me, there's many ways that I look at how the heart comes into surrender. And right now, the way that it's showing up in my life is through creativity, the unapologetic, I would say almost creativity of using different sources that come in through me and then out through me. And I mean that quite physically in poetry. That's a way that I feel it's not quite the mind. It's not quite the body. It's like words coming through from my heart. I see that in movement. It also comes in through different ways. I would say the flow of my work. I know when I'm, creating a project or a program or even sitting down to a coaching session with somebody. The difference between when the information and what I speak even or how I show up flows from my mind versus my heart. In most cases, to me, at this point in time, it comes with like a surprise. I'm like, did you just say that? Was that me really talking? And I know that that's actually coming from like a deeper knowing within. And in many ways, as we attune deeper, I also think it's the element of that intuition that flows through the heart, right? Like that knowing of what somebody needs before they need it, or connecting on different wavelengths where we can start to read each other in different ways. That with me would be the connection to the surrender to the heart, because I also that surrender of, in my work, I don't need to know. I don't need to know everything. Trusting that when I come into holding a space for a woman, for example, in a embodied coaching session, I trust on my heart to know how to lead that. It doesn't mean that I don't create a frame. My kind of masculine fire energy is still there, and yet I allow the flow of my heart to guide us as well.
Yeah, really being present. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think, maybe not so much in current times. In the past, they maybe used to associate emotions with the heart. And now, and as you said, we're learning a lot in our culture now about how emotions are stored in the body. So I'm just curious how you think of the emotional pieces of it, I guess. It's not necessarily all in one or the other of these spaces, but that can be some of the hardest part, right? To surrender to emotions to it that we're suppressing or that are stored.
Mm-hmm. Emotions as a topic could be a series of episodes.
I mean, it's big. It is. So I guess let's think about what are ways we can surrender to the emotions. Maybe we'll pull it back to surrender to keep it a little more contained.
I love that. And I would actually love to take that through that frame that we just did around the mind's understanding, the body's understanding, and the heart understanding of it. So, what I would bring in as surrendering to emotions through the mind's perspective is just understanding its motions. Our emotions are motions that take place in the body. And ideally, they move like water and they flow through us. And we allow them to do that so that they don't find a spot and stagnate and cling on to. There's many studies that are more and more coming into space, understanding that a lot of our illnesses and even chronic illnesses can come from deeply suppressed emotions that have not moved. Right? So understanding that. And when we start to understand and start to look into the body, okay, so how can I help myself move these emotions? What is the best way for me to do that? For me personally, it's dance. It's the kind of unstructured possibility of a good song coming on and just letting myself move like no one's watching. And that really works. There are also a number of frameworks around using movement. I mentioned 5 rhythms, which is a practice by Gabrielle Roth, who came up with this frame back in the 70s in the US. And since then, there's been many arms that have grown out of that. Ecstatic dance, embodied yoga. Recently, I heard actually is influenced by that as well. So finding a way that works for your body to move those emotions. And from the heart element for me that has worked and that I would invite others to try is journaling, allowing the words of what that emotion feels like to come through, and looking at the different shadows of it. The one piece I'm going to touch upon is that we have some basic emotions, where our natural emotions that help guide our actions, right? So that I know, am I at danger? And is that fear actually coming in because it's a flight, fight response, and I need to take action? Or is it something that's actually associated with a past event and is a shadow emotion that is coming in? Same thing with anger. I touch on anger a lot in my work with women. It's one of those emotions that we in our Western context have been most suppressed in being able to express, because it's also, we've put these labels on what emotion is good and what's bad and what's allowed and what's not allowed. And in many ways, anger can show up for us actually as sadness. And that's the immediate emotion. And being able to let ourselves go deeper and actually ask what is beneath that sadness, and allowing that anger to be expressed in a safe and in an intentional setting. So oh goodness, I could, Sonja, I could go on about this.
Yes.
I do write about this in my newsletter, which is Surrender to the Plan, and that's been actually the last couple of newsletters have touched upon emotions, and I feel I'm just scratching the surface, really.
Yes, and we'll make sure to put in the show notes how people can find that so they can read more. I definitely heard the interweaving in there too, because while you were talking about, almost that discernment kind of piece within the heart and the emotions, and seeing what's the shadow side, what's the past, what's the present, all of that. Like it was making me think, because it's so easy also to be because we're trying to de-emphasize the mind a lot of the time, because it's, doing monkey mind and all kinds of things. That's such a beautiful example of the mind and our consciousness helping us, right? It can help us with that discernment piece, but the focus is on the heart in that case. But it's like interwoven with the mind in that case in a healthy way. So,
yeah, I love that. That's the piece that I feel is most present in my work now, versus previously when I used to use yoga and meditation as a way to disassociate the mind. And now seeing how much of it's all about the wholeness and bringing the mind along, just that I get to, focus the mind of now we're going to focus here, notice, bring the mind to the breath. The breath is such an incredible way to give us an insight of where am I right now. And also letting that loop of moving through those emotions close, so that we don't go into numbness, dissociation, and potential trauma or re-traumatization. So I can notice, my breath is a little bit going a little bit faster. I'm not really taking a breath beyond here. Okay, so can I actually work with this breath to allow this emotion to move through me, because I let myself take a deeper breath, and with every breath I go deeper and deeper and deeper, and allow that to come through.
Yeah. And I can really hear the interweaving there, and also sort of how you can start. You can almost start from any place in the discernment and the surrender, because, you can do that. I mean, you're noticing, I guess, in order to do it. So there's the interweaving, but just by changing and working with your breath, it can shift so much. So.